The Great Hall of Station Terminus 7 stretched wider than any building on Earth. And Ambassador Elena Vasquez had to remind herself not to stare like a tourist as she walked toward her assigned seat among the gathered species of the Galaxy. 347 civilizations had sent their representatives to this place, and humanity was the newest addition to their ranks. Admitted to galactic society only 18 months ago, after first contact with a HFY survey ship near Jupiter, Elena was 42 years old. A former marine biologist who had spent 15 years studying great white sharks before the government recruited her for the diplomatic corps, and she carried herself with the calm patience of someone who had swum alongside predators and learned to respect them without fearing them. The Species Documentation Summit happened every 2 standard galactic years, and its purpose was simple enough to understand, even for newcomers like humanity, as every spacefaring civilization was required to submit detailed information about their homeworld's biology for the compendium of sentient life. This information served many purposes, from trade regulations to medical protocols to the containment procedures necessary when dangerous specimens were transported between worlds. Elena took her seat between the Morvathi delegate, a tall and thin creature with 6 arms and skin like wet paper, and the Vorn representative, a heavily muscled reptilian being whose scales were the color of dried blood. The Vorn glanced at her with what she had learned to recognize as dismissive amusement, and she pretended not to notice High Taxonomist Rexall called the assembly to order with a rumbling vocalization that needed no translation, and the gathered delegates fell silent with the practiced ease of beings who had attended many such summits. The first few hours passed in routine fashion as established. Species submitted updates to their files and answered questions from the Kethvari xenobiologists, who maintained the compendium. Elena watched and learned, noting how different species presented themselves, some with obvious pride in their homeworlds, deadliest creatures, and others with clinical detachment that suggested they viewed the whole exercise as beneath them. The Vorn delegate spoke at length about the armored leviathans of his ocean world, creatures that could crush starship hulls in their jaws, and had been known to attack orbital platforms that descended too close to the water's surface. The silicate representative, a being made of living crystal that communicated through precise vibrations, described the acid-spewing rock serpents that dominated the cave systems of their underground civilization. The delegate from the Hollow, a species that had evolved in absolute darkness, explained their nightmare creatures in terms that made several other representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. Elena listened to all of this with genuine interest, filing away information that might prove useful in future diplomatic encounters, because understanding what a species feared and respected could tell you more about them than any formal treaty negotiation. When the session broke for what passed as lunch among species with wildly different nutritional requirements, she found herself approached by the Kethvari chief xenobiologist, a being whose name translated roughly as "he who catalogs the stars." His mandibles clicked in the pattern she had learned to recognize as polite greeting, and he inclined his head in a gesture that humans and Kethvari apparently shared. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said through the translation device all delegates wore, "humanity's presentation is scheduled for the afternoon session, and I wish to speak with you beforehand about what to expect." Elena nodded and gestured for him to continue. "The standard questions are straightforward," he explained, "and we will ask about your homeworld's climate, dominant species across various biomes, and any organisms that pose particular dangers to other galactic citizens who might visit Earth." "I understand," Elena said. "There is one question in particular that new species sometimes find difficult," the Kethvari continued, and his mandibles clicked in a pattern she did not recognize. "And that is the identification of your planet's apex predator, Elena's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind her eyes that the Cathvari was not equipped to interpret. Many species, he went on, feel protective of their homeworld's most dangerous creatures, and some find it uncomfortable to discuss them in clinical terms. But I assure you that the information is used only for safety protocols and scientific documentation. I appreciate the warning, Elena said, and her voice carried a note of amusement that the Cathvari found puzzling. The afternoon session began with the formal presentation of Earth's biological data, and Elena stood before the assembled delegates with the confidence of someone who had faced down territorial great whites and lived to publish papers about the experience. She described Earth's varied biomes with precision, from the frozen poles to the tropical rainforests, from the deep ocean trenches to the highest mountain peaks. The delegates listened with varying degrees of interest, some taking detailed notes and others clearly waiting for the more exciting portions of the presentation. When she described Earth's large predators, the assembly grew more attentive, and she spoke of lions and tigers and bears with the casual familiarity of someone who had studied such creatures extensively. The Vorn delegate seemed unimpressed by the sizes she quoted, his own homeworld's predators being considerably larger, and the Marvafae appeared relieved that Earth's dangerous creatures were mostly confined to specific regions, rather than being a planet-wide threat finally. The Cathvari, chief xenobiologist, rose to ask the question that would change the galaxy's understanding of humanity forever. Ambassador Vasquez, he said, for our predator registry, please identify your homeworld's apex predator, so that appropriate containment protocols may be established for any specimens brought off-world. Elena paused, and in that pause the assembled delegates saw something they could not quite identify, a stillness that seemed somehow more significant than movement. Then she smiled, and it was not the diplomatic smile she had worn throughout the day, but something older and more primal. Earth's apex predator, she said, and her voice carried clearly through the vast chamber, is standing right in front of you. The silence that followed was absolute. I volunteer myself for whatever demonstration you require, Elena continued, and her smile did not waver as confusion rippled through the assembly like a stone dropped into still water. The Cathvari's mandibles clicked rapidly in what translated as polite disbelief, and around the chamber, delegates exchanged glances that needed no translation to understand. This soft creature with no claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom, was claiming to be her planet's most dangerous predator. Either the human was joking, or humanity was even stranger than anyone had suspected. The laughter started with the Vorn delegate, a deep rumbling sound that shook his massive chest and caused his scales to rattle against one another like stones in a leather bag within. Moments the sound had spread across the chamber as species after species joined in their own versions of amusement. From the high-pitched chittering of the Morvathi, to the crystalline resonance of the sheath, to the wet gurgling of the aquatic Delanolena, stood at the center of it all with her hands clasped behind her back, her expression patient and calm as she waited for the noise to die down. High taxonomist Vrexal was the last to stop laughing, and when he finally composed himself, his yellow eyes regarded her with something between pity and condescension. Little human, he said, and his voice carried the weight of a species that had conquered 3 star systems through physical dominance alone. I mean no offense, but surely you cannot be serious. I am completely serious. Elena replied. Rex rose from his seat, and the movement reminded every being in the chamber why the Vorn were feared across the galaxy. As he stood nearly 3 meters tall, and his arms were thick with muscle that could tear through starship bulkheads. My hatchlings, he said slowly, are born with claws that could disembowel a grazing beast, and by the time they reach maturity, they can bite through solid steel. So tell me, human, what weapons has your species evolved? Elena held up her hands, spreading her fingers to show her flat nails and soft skin. "These," she said simply. The laughter returned, though this time with an edge of genuine confusion. The Morvathi delegate leaned forward, its 6 arms folding and unfolding in the pattern that indicated curiosity. "Your optical organs," it said. "Can they perceive infrared radiation?" "They cannot," Elena admitted. "Ultraviolet." "Also no." The Morvathi made a sound of dismissal and leaned back, clearly having lost interest in this strange, soft creature that could not even see properly. The crystalline sheath resonated at a frequency that translated as academic inquiry. "What is the range of your auditory perception?" it asked. "Roughly 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, Elena said. "Though this decreases with age." The sheath's resonance shifted to something like incredulity, as their own hearing extended well into frequencies that humans would need specialized equipment to detect. The aquatic delian rose partially from its water-filled containment sphere, its gill slits fluttering with what might have been contempt. "How long can your species survive underwater without technological assistance?" It gurgled. "A few minutes," Elena said. "Depending on the individual and conditions, minutes," the delian repeated, as though the word itself was an insult. Around the chamber, delegates were pulling up Earth's biological data on their personal devices. And the more they read, the less impressive humanity appeared. Humans could not run particularly fast compared to many Earth species, let alone galactic ones. They had no natural armor beyond fragile skin that could be pierced by something as simple as a sharp stick. Their teeth were flat and blunt, better suited for grinding plants than tearing flesh. Their senses were mediocre at best, with no electroreception, no magnetoreception, no echolocation, no ability to see heat or sense vibrations through the ground. Ambassador Vasquez, the Kethvari chief xenobiologist, said, and his tone carried the gentle patience of someone addressing a confused child. "Perhaps there has been a translation error, as we are asking about your planet's apex predator, the creature at the top of the food chain, the being that all others fear." "There has been no error," Elena said, "but your own data indicates that humans are prey to numerous Earth species," the Kethvari continued, "with records of humans being killed by creatures called tigers, crocodiles, sharks, and many others." "That is correct." "Then how can you claim to be the apex predator?" Elena took a step forward, and something about the movement made several delegates unconsciously lean back in their seats without understanding why. "You have made a category error," she said, and her voice was calm but carried a weight that the translation devices struggled to convey. "And it is the same error that has led countless species across the galaxy to underestimate humanity." She began to pace slowly in front of the assembly, her movements unhurried but purposeful. "You are thinking about what an apex predator is," she continued, listing physical attributes like claws and fangs and armor and venom, measuring strength and speed and sensory capabilities. "And by those metrics, you are correct that humans seem unremarkable." She stopped and turned to face the delegates directly. "But that is the wrong question," she said, "because what matters is not what an apex predator is, but what an apex predator does." The chamber had grown quiet, the earlier amusement fading as delegates sensed that something important was being said, even if they did not yet understand it. "And what does Earth's apex predator do?" the Kethvari asked. Elena's smile returned, and this time more delegates recognized it for what it was. Not amusement, but something far more ancient. "Everything necessary to win," she said. The Vorn delegate snorted with derision, but his eyes had narrowed slightly. "Pretty words," Rexall said, "but words do not make a predator. And I have killed creatures larger and more dangerous than you with my bare hands." "I do not doubt it," Elena said. "But have you ever hunted something for 3 days without rest?" tracking it across 100 kilometers until it collapsed from exhaustion and fear, and then knelt beside it as it died, knowing that it had been doomed from the moment you decided to follow it. The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier somehow. Have you ever worked with 50 of your kind to drive a creature 100 times your size off a cliff? Elena continued. Or dug a pit and covered it with branches and waited for days until your prey fell into your trap. Or set fire to an entire forest to flush out the things hiding within. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes and sensors of every delegate in turn. We did not become apex predators because we were the strongest or fastest, she said. We became apex predators because nothing that hunted us ever survived long enough to try again. And nothing we decided to hunt ever escaped. No matter how long it took, no matter how far it ran, no matter how dangerous it was. You speak of the past, Frexall said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier contempt, and I am speaking of now, where you stand before me soft and small and breakable. Then let us settle this question properly, Elena said, and give me a test, any test you like, and I will show you what Earth's apex predator can do. The Kethvari chief xenobiologist clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The Council does maintain facilities for such demonstrations, he said slowly, though they are typically used to assess dangerous fauna rather than sentient delegates. I volunteer, Elena said, and her voice carried absolute certainty. Whatever you have, whatever you design, I will show you why every creature on Earth learned to fear the thing that walks on two legs and carries fire in its hands. The biodome on Hunting Moon Kethfor stretched across nearly 100 square kilometers of artificially maintained wilderness, and it contained specimens of the deadliest creatures from across the known galaxy. The Kethvari had built it centuries ago as a research facility, a place to study predators from different worlds in controlled environments. And over the years it had also become a proving ground of sorts, a place where warriors could test themselves against the universe's most dangerous. Fauna 47 Council delegates had traveled to the moon to watch the humans' demonstration, and they gathered in an observation center high above the biodome floor where dozens of drone feeds displayed every corner of the enclosed wilderness. Elena stood at the entrance airlock wearing the same clothes she had worn to the summit. Simple, practical garments that would not have looked out of place on any human hiking trail. Ambassador Vasquez, the Kethvari chief xenobiologist, said through the intercom, the Council has agreed to your demonstration, and you will be given 72 standard hours to survive within the biodome. Understood, Elena said. The creatures within include specimens that have killed trained Vorn warriors, that have driven the Marvathi from 2 colony worlds, and that are considered among the most dangerous fauna in the catalog galaxy. Understood, Elena repeated. You may request any equipment you wish within reason. Elena considered this for a moment. A knife, she said. A length of cord approximately 10 meters long, and a piece of flint. The Kethvari's mandibles clicked with what she had learned to recognize as surprise. No projectile weapons, he asked. No armor or protective gear, no communications equipment, no medical supplies. No. Ambassador, I must inform you that 14 sentient beings have died within this facility, and none of them entered as poorly equipped as you propose to be. I understand the risks. Taxonomist Rexall's voice cut through the intercom, heavy with skepticism. You mean to face the creatures within with nothing but a blade and string, he said. And you call this a demonstration of predatory superiority? Elena smiled. And it was the same smile that had unsettled the delegates at the summit. If I brought guns and armor, she said, you would credit the technology rather than the species. So I will show you what a human can do with what any human anywhere could find or make. And then you will understand. The airlock cycled open, and Elena stepped into the biodome without looking back. The observation center was silent as the delegates watched her walk into the artificial wilderness. A small soft figure surrounded by creatures that could kill her in 100 different ways. She is going to die, the Marvathi delegate said quietly. And we are going to watch it happen. Probably, Rexall agreed, though something in his voice suggested. He was less certain than his words implied. Lena moved through the undergrowth with a careful efficiency that immediately drew attention from the human xenobiologists who had been assigned to provide commentary for the delegates. Notice her movement pattern, Dr. James Chun said from his position beside the main display. She is not walking randomly but constantly scanning her environment, checking sightlines, identifying potential threats and resources simultaneously. All prey animals do this, the Marvathi delegate said dismissively. Yes, Doctor. Chun agreed. But watch what else she does. Within the first hour, Elena had located a source of fresh water, identified 3 different species of plant that she could eat safely, and begun constructing something in a small clearing. What is she building? The Kethvari asked. Snares, Dr. Chun said. Simple traps that will catch small prey using nothing but the cord she requested, and some bent branches. She is hunting already. Humans are always hunting, Dr. Chun said, even when we do not appear to be. By the 4th hour, Elena had caught and killed 2 small creatures, had started a fire using her flint and dried grass, and had cooked and eaten her first meal in the biodome. Delegates watched with growing interest as she worked, her movements methodical and unhurried, despite being surrounded by predators that could smell her fire from kilometers away. The smoke will attract attention, the Vorn delegate observed. Yes, Doctor. Chun said simply. She wants to be found. She wants to know what will come. The first predator to investigate was a silicate tunneler, a creature roughly the size of an earth tiger that could move through solid rock as easily as water. It emerged from the ground less than 20 meters from Elena's small camp, and the delegates leaned forward expecting to witness the first attack. Elena did not run or freeze or show any sign of fear as she turned to face the creature. Instead, rising slowly to her feet with her knife held loosely at her side, the tunneler regarded her with sensory organs that humans would struggle to comprehend, tasting the air and the vibrations of her heartbeat and the chemical signature of her fear. And she was afraid. The creature could sense it clearly, but she did not act like prey for long moments, neither moved. And then the tunneler turned and slid back into the earth without attacking. What happened? The sheath delegate resonated with confusion. It decided she was not worth the risk, Dr. Chun explained. And that is something humans have been doing to predators for 100,000 years, convincing them through posture and behavior that attacking us will cost more than it gains. The next 18 hours were a masterclass in human adaptability. As Elena slept in short shifts, constantly repositioned her camp, and began tracking something through the undergrowth with a patience that made several delegates uncomfortable. What is she following? The Kethvari asked there. Chun checked the drone feeds and went very still. The Shadow Stalker, he said quietly. The observation center erupted in protest, as the Shadow Stalker was the most dangerous creature in the biodome. A Kethvari apex predator that had killed 11 sentient beings in previous demonstrations. She cannot be serious, the Marvathi delegate said. She is hunting it, Rexall said slowly, and his voice carried something that might have been the beginning of respect. No, Doctor, Chun corrected. She's doing something much more human than that. What? She is learning its patterns, Doctor Chun said, studying how it moves and hunts and rests, finding its weaknesses, and when she knows enough, she will use that knowledge against it. The delegates watched in silence as Elena tracked the most dangerous creature in the biodome, And for the first time since her arrival at the summit, none of them were laughing 28 hours into the demonstration. Elena had not slept more than 90 minutes total. How is she still functioning? The Morvathi delegate asked. Its species requiring 8 hours of rest in every 24. Humans can operate without sleep for extended periods. Doctor, Chun explained, though it does eventually impair function. But more importantly, her quarry cannot. As the Shadow Stalker is an ambush predator that relies on short bursts of activity followed by long rest periods. She is tiring it out. She is doing what humans have done since before we had language. Doctor, Chum said, she is running it down. The Shadow Stalker had never been prey before, and it did not understand what was happening for 11 cycles of darkness and light. It had been the undisputed master of the biodome, killing anything that entered its territory with the patient efficiency of a creature perfectly evolved for ambush hunting. Its body was designed for brief explosive violence. Powerful limbs that could propel it forward at speeds no prey could match. Claws that could tear through armor plating, jaws strong enough to crush bone, and senses that could detect the heartbeat of a terrified creature from half a kilometer away. But none of those gifts had prepared it for this. The human had found its trail 30 hours ago, and since then the creature had not known a moment of peace. Every time it stopped to rest, the human appeared at the edge of its awareness, never attacking, never getting close enough to fight, just following with a patience that bordered on madness. The Shadow Stalker had tried everything it knew, doubling back on its own trail, hiding in places that should have been invisible, laying ambushes that had killed Vorn warriors. But nothing worked. The human kept coming. Look at the readings, Doctor, Chun told the assembled delegates, pointing to the biological monitoring data their drones were collecting. The Shadow Stalker's stress hormones have been elevated for nearly 20 hours straight, and its body is not designed for this kind of sustained fear. Fear, Rexal repeated, and his voice was heavy with disbelief. You are saying that the most dangerous creature in this facility is afraid of that small human. I am saying that it has never encountered anything like her before, Doctor, Chun said. Predators do not usually have to deal with being hunted, and when they do, they have no instincts to fall back on, no evolved responses to guide them. On the main display, Elena was visible moving through the undergrowth, and the delegates could see what Dr. Chun meant about her persistence. She was injured now. A deep gash on her left arm from a brief encounter with the Shadow Stalker 6 hours ago, where the creature had attacked and she had somehow survived. Rolling with the blow and landing a cut of her own before it retreated, the wound would have sent a Morvathi into shock and left a Kethvari unable to function. But Elena had wrapped it with strips torn from her own clothing and kept moving. How? The Morvathi delegate asked, its voice small with something approaching awe. How is she still walking? Human blood clots rapidly when exposed to air, Dr. Chun explained. And our bodies produce chemicals that suppress pain and increase alertness when we are injured, what we call the fight-or-flight response. And humans can sustain that response for hours or even days when necessary. That is not possible. Evolution does not care about possible, Dr. Chun said, only about what works, and this worked for us. The Shadow Stalker attacked twice more over the next 8 hours. And both times the pattern was the same. It would burst from concealment with all the lethal speed its body could produce. And Elena would somehow not be where it expected her to be, moving before it moved. Reading its intentions through cues that even the delegate's advanced sensors could not detect, she took more wounds. A slash across her back that bled freely before clotting. A bite on her calf that left her limping. A blow to her ribs that may have cracked bone. She also wounded the Shadow Stalker. Her knife found its flesh 3 times during those hours. Never deep enough to kill, but enough to draw blood. Enough to cause pain. Enough to make the creature understand that attacking her had a cost. It is learning to fear her. The HFY chief xenobiologist said quietly, "No, Doctor." Chun corrected. "It already fears her. Now it is learning that it cannot make the fear stop. And that is so much worse." At hour 40, the Shadow Stalker made a mistake born of exhaustion and terror, turning to attack when it should have kept running. And Elena was ready. She did not try to fight it strength against strength, because that would have been suicide. Instead, she moved to the side at the last moment and drove her knife into its shoulder joint, twisting as she pulled free to cause maximum damage. The creature screamed, a sound that several delegates had never heard before, and fled into the undergrowth, trailing blood. Elena followed. "Why does she not let it go?" the Morvahe asked. "It is wounded now. It is no longer a threat, because she is not defending herself," Rexall said slowly. And the other delegates turned to look at him in surprise. "She is proving a point. You begin to understand, Doctor." Chun said the hunt continued for another 12 hours. And during that time, the Shadow Stalker's movements became increasingly erratic as blood loss and exhaustion took their toll. It tried to hide in a cave system that should have been impenetrable, and Elena smoked it out using fire. It tried to cross a river to break its scent trail, and Elena followed the bloody water downstream until she found where it emerged. It tried to lay a final ambush, spending its last reserves of strength on one desperate attack. And Elena dodged the blow she should not have been able to see coming and opened another wound on its flank. At hour 52, the Shadow Stalker collapsed in a small clearing, its body finally giving out after 2 days of constant pursuit. Elena approached slowly, her knife ready, and the delegates held their breath, expecting the killing blow. The creature looked up at her with eyes that held something the HFY xenobiologist would later spend hours trying to analyze. And what he eventually concluded was recognition. Not recognition of a specific individual, but recognition of what she was: a predator, a better predator. The kind of predator that did not stop, that did not give up, that would follow you to the ends of whatever world you fled to, and be there, waiting when you finally fell. Elena knelt beside the Shadow Stalker, and for a long moment neither moved. Then she did something that none of the delegates expected. She reached into the small pack she had assembled during her time in the biodome and withdrew a container of water, and she held it to the creature's mouth and let it drink. "What is she doing?" the Morvathi delegate asked. "She is showing mercy," Rexall said, and his voice was very quiet. Now Elena cleaned the creature's wounds with water from the stream, using the same methodical care she had applied to her own injuries. And the Shadow Stalker let her without resistance. The creature that killed 11 sentient beings, the HFY chief xenobiologist said slowly, is letting her touch it, because it knows, Dr. Chun said. It knows on a level deeper than thought that she could kill it if she chose to, and it knows that she is choosing not to. And that knowledge has changed everything between them. Elena stayed with the Shadow Stalker for 3 hours, treating its wounds and feeding it from her own supplies. And the delegates watched in silence that was very different from the silence at the summit. This was not the silence of dismissal or confusion. This was the silence of beings who were beginning to understand that they had fundamentally misunderstood what it meant to be dangerous. The airlock opened and Elena Vasquez walked out of the biodome on her own 2 feet. And the assembled delegates rose from their seats in a gesture of respect that crossed all cultural boundaries. She was a wreck by any reasonable measure, covered in dried blood, both her own and the Shadow Stalker's, limping heavily from the wound on her calf, holding her ribs in a way that suggested serious injury beneath the makeshift bandages. But she was alive, and behind her in the biodome, a creature that had killed 11 sentient beings was resting peacefully after being tended by its would-be prey. The HFY chief xenobiologist approached her with medical staff close behind, and his mandibles clicked in a pattern she did not recognize, but somehow understood as profound respect. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, "you have demonstrated something that I do not think any of us fully expected." "I know," Elena said. And despite her injuries, her voice was steady. "You could have killed the Shadow Stalker," the Kethvari continued. "After everything it did, after all the wounds it gave you, you had every right to end its life. So why did you not?" Elena accepted a water container from one of the medical staff and drank deeply before answering. "Because apex predators do not kill everything they can," she said. "They kill what they need to, and once that creature stopped being a threat, it did not need to die. But it tried to kill you. Yes. And if it had succeeded, that would have been fair, because I was in its territory, hunting it. So it had every right to fight back, but it failed, and I won. And that means the choice of what happened next belonged to me." She looked around at the assembled delegates, meeting the eyes and senses of beings who had laughed at her 3 days ago and who were now looking at her with expressions ranging from awe to fear to something approaching reverence on Earth. She continued, "We have a saying that the measure of a person is not how they treat their equals, but how they treat those who cannot fight back. And the same is true for predators. You showed mercy to prove a philosophical point," Rexall said. And the massive Vorn's voice held none of its earlier contempt. "I show mercy because it was the right thing to do," Elena said. "The philosophical point is just a bonus." She allowed the medical staff to guide her toward a treatment area. But before she left the observation center, she turned back to address the assembly one final time. "You wanted to know what Earth's apex predator was," she said. "And now, you know. But I want to make sure you understand what that actually means." The delegates listened in silence. "We did not become apex predators because we evolved the best weapons or armor or senses," Elena said. "We became apex predators because we learned to think, to plan, to cooperate, to adapt, and to never, ever stop." She paused to let that sink in. "A single human is a curiosity," she continued. "Clever enough to be interesting, but not particularly threatening on our own. But give a human time to prepare, and they become a problem. Because we will study you, learn your patterns, find your weaknesses, and exploit them." Her eyes swept across the chamber. "And humans who work together," she said, "are something else entirely, because we hunted species into extinction before we had language. We reshaped our planet's climate by accident. We split the atom and touched our moon, and are now standing among you asking to be accepted as equals. You speak of conquest," the Morvathi delegate said, and there was fear in its voice now. "No," Elena said firmly. "I speak of capability. Because the same traits that made us apex predators also gave us science, medicine, art, and philosophy. And we did not come to the stars looking for things to hunt." "Then what do you want?" the Kethvari asked. Elena's expression softened into something that was almost gentle. "Friends," she said. "Allies, trading partners, fellow travelers in a universe that is very large and very dangerous. Because we have spent our entire existence as a species fighting to survive. And we are tired of fighting alone." She gestured at her wounded body, at the biodome visible through the observation windows, at the creature inside that she had hunted and defeated, and then chosen to save. "I could have killed the Shadow Stalker," she said. "But I decided that mercy was more valuable than another death. And that is the choice humanity wants to make with the rest of the galaxy. And if someone refuses that choice," Rexall asked, "if someone decides that humanity would make better prey than partners," Elena's smile returned. And now every delegate in the chamber recognized it for what it was. "Then they are welcome to try," she said. "But I would suggest they ask the Shadow Stalker first how that worked out." She turned and limped away toward the medical bay. And behind her, the observation center was filled with a silence that lasted for a very long time. 3 days later, the HFY chief xenobiologist updated the compendium of sentient life with humanity's official entry under the section labeled Apex Predator. He wrote a single line that would be studied and debated across the galaxy for centuries to come. Homo sapiens, status, apex, classification, persistence predator, pack hunter, tool user, extreme adaptability, threat assessment, do not engage, recommended protocol, alliance. And in a footnote, he added something that was entirely unofficial, but which he felt was necessary. They could destroy us if they chose to, and they choose instead to offer friendship. And I do not know if that makes them more or less frightening, but I know that I am grateful. The summit concluded without further incident. And Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to Earth with new trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and the unofficial title of She Who Hunted the Shadow that the HFY had given her when reporters asked her about her experience. She said only that she had done what any human would do in the same situation, and that the galaxy had simply needed to see what that looked like. She never returned to hunting Moon HFY, but she was told that the shadow stalker she had hunted and spared lived for another 30 years in the biodome, and that it never attacked another sentient being. Some said it had learned fear. Others said it learned something more important. It had learned respect.